November 4, 1850. Dear Bones, weak, yet lucid. I am not sure of the date, yet my almanac assures me by tide and sunset that it must be correct. I sit at my desk, where I sat when I first wrote you from Chapelwaite, and look out over the dark sea from which the last of the light is rapidly fading. I shall never see more. This night is my night. I leave it for whatever shadows be. How it heaves itself on the rocks, this sea. It throws clouds of sea foam at the darkling sky in banners, making the floor beneath me tremble. In the window glass I see my reflection, pallid as any vampire's. I have been without nourishment since the 27th of October, and should have been without water had Calvin not left a carafe beside my bed on that day. Oh, Cal! He is no more, Bones. He is gone in my place, in the place of this wretch with his pipe-stem arms and skull face who I see reflected back in the darkened glass. And yet he may be the more fortunate, for no dreams haunt him as they have haunted me these last days. Twisted shapes that lurk in the nightmare corridors of delirium. Even now my hands tremble. I have splotched the page with ink. Calvin confronted me on that morning just as I was about to slip away, and I, thinking I had been so crafty, I had told him that I had decided we must leave, and asked him if he would go to Tandrell, some 10 miles distant, and hire a trap where we were less notorious. He agreed to make the hike, and I watched him leave by the sea road. When he was out of sight, I quickly made myself ready, donning both coat and muffler, for the weather had turned frosty. The first touch of coming winter was on that morning's cutting breeze. I wished briefly for a gun, and laughed at myself for the wish. What avail guns in such a matter? I let myself out by the pantry-way, pausing for a last look at sea and sky, for the smell of the fresh air against the putrescence I knew I should smell soon enough, for the sight of a foraging gull wheeling below the clouds. I turned, and there stood Calvin McCann. "You shall not go alone," said he, and his face was as grim as ever I have seen it. "But, Calvin," I began. "No, not a word. We go together and do what we must, or I return you bodily to the house. You are not well. You shall not go alone." It is impossible to describe the conflicting emotions that swept over me. Confusion, pique, gratefulness. Yet the greatest of them was love. We made our way silently past the summer house and the sundial, down the weed-covered verge and into the woods. All was dead still. Not a bird sang nor a wood-cricket chirped. The wood seemed cupped in a silent pall. There was only the ever-present smell of salt, and from far away the faint tang of wood smoke. The woods were a blazoned riot of color, but to my eye, scarlet seemed to predominate all. Soon the scent of salt passed, and another more sinister odor took its place, that rottenness which I have mentioned. When we came to the leaning bridge which spanned the Royal, I expected Cal to ask me to defer, but he did not. He paused, looked at that grim spire which seemed to mock the blue sky above it, and then looked at me. We went on. We proceeded with quick yet dread steps to James Boone's church. The door still hung ajar from our latter exit, and the darkness within seemed to leer at us. As we mounted the steps, brass seemed to fill my heart. My hand trembled as it touched the door handle and pulled it. The smell within was greater, more noxious than ever. We stepped into the shadowy anteroom, and with no pause, into the main chamber. It was a shambles. Something vast had been at work in there, and a mighty destruction had taken place. Pews were overturned and heaped like jackstraws. The wicked cross lay against the east wall, and a jagged hole in the plaster above it testified to the force with which it had been hurled. The oil lamps had been ripped from their high fixtures, and the reek of whale oil mingled with the terrible stink which pervaded the town. And down the center aisle, like a ghastly bridle path, was a trail of black ichor mingled with sinister tendrils of blood. Our eyes followed it to the pulpit, the only untouched thing in view. Atop it, staring at us from across that blasphemous book with glazed eyes, was the butchered body of a lamb. "God," Calvin whispered. We approached, keeping clear of the slime on the floor. The room echoed back our footsteps and seemed to transmute them into the sound of gigantic laughter. We mounted the narthex together. The lamb had not been torn or eaten. It appeared, rather, to have been squeezed until its blood vessels had forcibly ruptured. Blood lay in thick and noisome puddles on the lectern itself, and about the base of it. Yet on the book it was transparent, and the crabbed runes could be read through it, as through colored glass. "Must we touch it?" Cal asked, unfaltering. "Yes, I must have it." "What will you do?" "What should have been done 60 years ago. I'm going to destroy it." We rolled the lamb's corpse away from the book. It struck the floor with a hideous, lolling thud. The blood-stained pages now seemed alive with a scarlet glow of their own. My ears began to ring and hum. A low chant seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. From the twisted look on Cal's face, I knew he heard the same. The floor beneath us trembled, as if the familiar which haunted this church came now unto us to protect its own. The fabric of sane space and time seemed to twist and crack. The church seemed filled with specters and litten with the hell glow of eternal cold fire. It seemed that I saw James Boone, hideous and misshapen, cavorting around the supine body of a woman, and my grand-uncle Philip behind him, an acolyte in black hooded cassock, who held a knife and bowl. "Deum vobiscum magna vermis." Words shuddered and writhed on the page before me. Soaked in the blood of sacrifice, prize of a creature that shambles beyond the stars. A blind, interbred congregation swaying in mindless demonic praise, deformed faces filled with hungering, nameless anticipation. And the Latin was replaced by an older tongue, ancient when Egypt was young and the pyramids unbuilt, ancient when this earth still hung in an unformed boiling firmament of empty gas. "Gaiargen, Vardar, Yog-Sargoth, Verminis, Gaiargen, Gaiargen, Gaiargen." The pulpit began to rend and split, pushing upward. Calvin screamed and lifted an arm to shield his face. The narthex trembled with a huge, tenebrous motion like a ship racked in a gale. I snatched up the book and held it away from me. It seemed filled with the heat of the sun, and I felt that I should be cindered, blinded. "Run!" Calvin screamed. "Run!" But I stood frozen, and the alien presence filled me like an ancient vessel that had waited for years, for generations. "Gaiargen Vardar!" I screamed. "Servant of the Yog-Sothoth! Oh, the Nameless One! The worm from beyond space! Star Eater! Blinder of time! Verminis! Now comes the hour filling the time of rending! Verminis! Al-Ya! Alya! Kayagan! Calvin pushed me, and I tottered, the church whirling before me, and fell to the floor. My head crashed against the edge of an upturned pew, and red fire filled my head, yet seemed to clear it. I groped for the sulfur matches I brought. Subterranean thunder filled the place. Plaster fell. The rusted bell in the steeple pealed a choked devil's carillon in sympathetic vibration. My match flared. I touched it to the book just as the pulpit exploded upward in a rending explosion of wood. A huge black maw was discovered beneath. Cal tottered on the edge, his hands held out, his face distended in a wordless scream that I shall hear forever. And then there was a huge surge of gray, vibrating flesh. The smell became a nightmare tide. It was a huge outpouring of a viscid, pustulant jelly. A huge and awful form that seemed to skyrocket from the very bowels of the ground. And yet, with a sudden horrible comprehension which no man can have known, I perceived that it was but one ring, one segment of a monster worm that had existed eyeless for years in the chamber darkness beneath that abominated church. The book flared a light in my hands, and the thing seemed to scream soundlessly above me. Calvin was struck glancingly and flung the length of the church like a doll with a broken neck. It subsided. The thing subsided, leaving only a huge and shattered hole surrounded with black slime, and a great screaming, mewling sound that seemed to fade through a colossal distance and was gone. I looked down. The book was ashes. I began to laugh, then to howl like a struck beast. All sanity left me, and I sat on the floor with blood streaming from my temples, screaming and gibbering into those unhallowed shadows, while Calvin sprawled in the far corner, staring at me with glazing, horror-struck eyes. I have no idea how long I existed in that state. It is beyond all telling. But when I came again to my faculties, shadows had drawn long paths around me, and I sat in twilight. Movement had caught my eye. Movement from the shattered hole in the narthex floor. A hand groped its way over the riven floorboards. My mad laughter choked in my throat. All hysteria melted into numb bloodlessness. With terrible, vengeful slowness, a racked figure pulled itself up from darkness, and a half-skull peered at me. Beetles crawled over the fleshless forehead. A rotted cassock clung to the askew hollows of mouldered collarbones. Only the eyes lived. Red, insane pits that glared at me with more than lunacy. They glared with the empty life of the pathless wastes beyond the edges of the universe. It came to take me down to darkness. That was when I fled, screeching, leaving the body of my lifelong friend unheeded in that place of dread. I ran until the air seemed to burst like magma in my lungs and brain. I ran until I had gained this possessed and tainted house again, and my room where I collapsed, and have lain like a dead man until today. I ran because even in my crazed state, and even in the shattered ruin of that dead yet animated shape, I had seen the family resemblance. Yet not of Philip, or of Robert, whose likenesses hang in the upstairs gallery. That rotted visage belonged to James Boone, keeper of the worm. He still lives somewhere in the twisted, lightless wanderings beneath Jerusalem's lot and chapel wait. And it still lives. The burning of the book thwarted it, but there are other copies. Yet I am the gateway, and I am the last of the Boone blood. For the good of all humanity, I must die and break the chain forever. I go to the sea now, Bones. My journey, like my story, is at an end. May God rest you and grant you all peace, Charles. The odd series of papers above was eventually received by Mr. Everett Granson, to whom they had been addressed. It is assumed that a recurrence of the unfortunate brain fever which struck him originally following the death of his wife in 1848 caused Charles Boone to lose his sanity and murder his companion and longtime friend, Mr. Calvin McCann. The entries in Mr. McCann's pocket journal are a fascinating exercise in forgery, undoubtedly perpetrated by Charles Boone, in an effort to reinforce his own paranoid delusions. In at least two particulars, however, Charles Boone is proved wrong. First, when the town of Jerusalem's lot was rediscovered, I use the term historically, of course, the floor of the narthex, although rotted, showed no signs of explosion or huge damage. Although the ancient pews were overturned and several windows shattered, this can be assumed to be the work of vandals from neighboring towns over the years. Among the older residents of Preacher's Corners and Tandro, there is still some idle rumor about Jerusalem's lot. Perhaps in his day it was this kind of harmless folk legend which started Charles Boone's mind on its fatal course. But this seems hardly relevant. Second, Charles Boone was not the last of his line. His grandfather, Robert Boone, sired at least two bastards. One died in infancy. The second took the Boone name and located in the town of Central Falls, Rhode Island. I am the final descendant of this offshoot of the Boone line. Charles Boone's second cousin, removed by 3 generations. These papers have been in my committal for 10 years. I offer them for publication on the occasion of my residence in the Boone ancestral home, Chapelwaite, in the hope that the reader will find sympathy in his heart for Charles Boone's poor, misguided soul. So far as I can tell, he was correct about only one thing. This place badly needs the services of an exterminator. There are some huge rats in the walls, by the sound. Signed, James Robert Boone, October 2nd, 1971.